I will call the meeting to order. It's like 8:10. Meeting of the Town Council Financial Oversight Committee for Wednesday, June 17th, being held at the meeting room at the Senior Center. The first order of business is to approve the minutes of June 10th. Has everyone read the minutes? Made any comments to Kathy? Not, I'll entertain a motion. Do I hear a motion to accept the minutes of June 10th?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of June 10th.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, just say aye.
No.
No,
Oh,
you
aye.
have to do it.
Aye.
That's right.
No roll call, yeah.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, very good. Thank you. Second on the agenda was the discussion, third item on the agenda actually, is the discussion on the front desk attendant. We listened at one point to the police chief and his reasoning on it. It is an increase of $60,000 on the budget for the police department, and I open the floor to anyone who has questions, comments, amendments to that.
Is the chief coming?
Not that I know
I'm sure he's available if you want him, but
Yeah.
he's not, I'm not expecting him.
of. Yeah. Well, you are,
Okay. I have a question. It's regarding the greater position. In the job description that was presented to us, it's slightly different than the conversation that we had, and maybe I recalled incorrectly. But it doesn't say anything about being able to handle health calls or emergency health calls. So it all refers to as be able to delegate the call to some other location. But if the greeter were to pick up the phone and someone were to call the general number, how would they handle that? They'd say, it's kind of like, I'm having a heart attack and I need someone here, we'll call this other number. How does that work?
Wouldn't I don't know. I think
Well, if you're
wouldn't it just get routed back to 911?
Well, that's what I'm asking, yeah, I don't know, I don't
That's
know how
my
that works.
understanding. I can call the chief and see if he wants to come in and answer, but no, if Chris would allow me, my preference, and obviously maybe it doesn't matter at all, but
of course it matters.
we're getting into the weeds of what the PD is going to do with its positions.
Yeah.
And I don't feel the competence in that area to tell the police chief how to assign his staff. And my feeling is that perhaps our time would be better spent establishing a budget amount.
I agree.
This is what we do with all the other departments. I mean, I don't tell Diane
I agree.
who to bring in on admin and what to have them do.
Yeah, we don't do that with the schools.
And we don't do it with anybody else.
No.
And I think we're getting into the real operations level.
Yeah.
And if the chief feels that he needs this position, we could argue until the cows come home about whether he does or he doesn't, or how many hours. So that doesn't answer your question, Tom, and I will
No.
call him,
But
but
what you
I
did
think
say
it's
is true.
important
No, what
to,
you did say is true, and it's important, but it was just a question.
yeah, I don't,
And we're creating a new position, and that's my issue.
Mary, I'm not
It's a
sure.
new position to the town that's gonna create an OPEB responsibility, and I wanna make sure that I have all the answers to the questions that get asked me.
My only concern with this is that it's an increase of $63,837.60 on the budget. If we reduce that budget, then the chief would have to accordingly adjust how he's going to man that particular function. I found quite frankly, I'm concerned about the cost for weekend coverage. And also, I can understand the backup time if the person gets sick right now, he's looking at one front desk attendant, correct?
Yes.
And one person to do both days on the weekends?
That's his desire.
Okay.
The scenario, it was identified as scenario number 4 that you received last week. That was the 66,000 number, give or take.
Yes.
That presumed that Lori Hall, who's the civilian administrative employee now, would work 8 to 12 in that front desk. And that, if you look at the scenario, it's around $4,600 that would be necessary to
Cover that.
increase Lori's hourly wage by that amount
Yes.
over the course of a year. And then one full-timer that would staff the desk from 12 to 8, which would give the chief the coverage he wants, which is from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And then on the weekends, there was a figure of like 15,000, give or take, which was the part-time employee that would work Saturdays and Sundays.
Yeah.
Now, personally, I understand the comments that have been made about maybe the weekend coverage isn't as imperative from our point of view.
Yeah.
I've never been a policeman, so I don't know. What I've talked to the chief about is maybe you could have your coverage have your one full-timer and go from 10 to 6 and leave Lori Hall
Yes.
where she is, and we'd save that $4,600. Have a full-time person Monday through Friday and do what you will on the weekends, because there is going to be circumstances where there's a suicide watch prisoner or there's going to have to be a backfill. And Mike, maybe you know more of the detail about this, but sometimes if somebody's held on arrest and they're not bailed or they're waiting arraignment, there may have to be a higher level employee skill set wise in terms of monitoring that. And that's an additional cost. But I guess my point is, I think these are things that are up to the chief to figure out. I'm not going to second guess what he tells me he needs.
Yeah.
And I think if the committee's concerned about the money, then just say you can have 30,000 more, you can have 20,000 more, you can have nothing more, because he's not filling that retired police officer position either. I mean,
But he's going
This
to
year.
have next year.
I mean, next year.
well, sure, but a lot of departments may come back looking for stuff next year that they're not asking for this year because of their consideration for our circumstances. So it's just, we've been around and around and around, the chief and I. And I know he feels very strongly, he respects you and he respects your role and he will abide by the budget he's given. I told him that I don't want to be his advocate necessarily, but I think that his opinion of how to run his own department, that's what he's the police chief for.
I guess the question that I've heard the most is, why can't it be done during regular business hours? Say, as you said, 10 to 6, 9 to 4. I don't understand, and that's just kind of a silly question and a comment in a way.
Well, no, it's
Because
not.
we're
it's not.
concerned about the $63,000, or in this last scenario, $66,000. So,
Just to maybe answer questions that were on the floor here, we were talking about prisoners, and a function of having a prisoner requires cell watch. And greeters, if you hired a greeter today, a greeter's not going to be trained in that capacity to do cell watch.
right,
Okay, there is an exception because I believe that Laurie Hebert, who is one of our dispatchers right now, has that capability, and I can understand why, because if you have a female prisoner, it's nice to have one of your dispatchers trained in that capacity, because you're not going to have males doing cell watch for females, especially if they had to be transported or something like that. So Laurie Hebert fits that criteria, but greeters hired in the future, I'm not saying, and I know the chief stated the same thing, they can be trained, and the training isn't really, it's not extensive, but there is training required. So, and then you'd probably have to have a greeter that said, would agree to that capacity too, because it's a totally different skill set than the job of a greeter.
exactly.
Question one. number two, we're talking about, Mary, I think what we're trying to do is come up with a figure that works for the town, and then try to figure out how to plug this hole with the greeter. But when we try to pin down times where that greeter's needed, that greeter is really there for non-emergency items. You know, all the emergency calls, obviously, we'll roll over to Westcom. So nobody can really tell when somebody's going to walk in. It's almost like if they're non-essential requirements that people are looking for or information, then we'd have to almost train the general public. And this is when we're open to conduct that type of business. Tom, on your question, I think it was if someone walked in and you're saying there's a medical emergency and they went right to the greeter or called the greeter, somebody needs to roll that call over. Now that becomes a function of public safety. That call needs to be rolled over to Westcom, either through 911. The greeter could make the call. Just like sometimes if somebody calls the greeter line, I don't want to say the greeter line, but a regular call into the police department, it will say, the first thing it will say is, if this is an emergency, please hang up and dial 911. So all those emergency calls that have to do with public safety need to be directed toward Westcom. And what the chief is talking about are these non-essential walk-in parties that need help with whatever it is, licensing issues, applications, and other general questions.
Yeah, so that delay, Mike, is minuscule. So if I were to have an emergency and I only know the police regular number, and for some reason I don't think to call 911, then I call the police regular number, and the phone tree line says, this is an emergency, hang up and dial 911. Now I'm reminded I need to do that, but do they automatically transfer, or do you have to hang up and dial?
That's a function of technology.
Yeah,
So-
I don't know if you have to hang up and redial or if it goes automatically.
But yeah,
That's what I was before.
that's functionality. I think and I understand your concern.
So it can be done.
But
Okay.
we're trying to figure out staffing hours and what we can afford, and how do we want to train the general public that this is when we're open to conduct that type of business.
But see, what I think you're getting into is, let's say you decide as a group to recommend 50,000 or 40,000. And the chief decides, well, okay, I'll live without a greeter and I'll bring in a police officer at, the 3/4 year mark or something. Then is he going to be subject to criticism because he didn't use the money the way the committee said he had to use it? See, I think that's beyond the scope. I think it's beyond my scope. And I'm only mentioning it because it's causing great consternation on the part of our public safety chief.
Yeah.
I'm not arguing. I realize from the bottom of my heart the fiscal difficulties. Not advocating for let's spend more. Every single department head has cut their budget to the bone, including the police chief. So this came about at the last minute, and I know it did because when the first budgets were submitted in December, the town had not signed on to the Westcom arrangement. And so it was sort of a late to the party addition to his budget in June. And that doesn't justify anything, but it might explain some of the circumstance.
Jim.
I have just a couple of things. I know the schools, even the schools explain to us what they intend to do with the money, even though we have no authority over how it's done. And that's legislative. We can't do anything about that. But in my past experience, we've always asked the questions of the other town departments to make sure that the proposed use of the funds made sense to us, which is I think part of what we need to do. I think with this particular issue, it's a little thorny for me, only because if it were a matter of how many police officers or coverage or something in the actual public safety, I would automatically defer and say I don't know anything about that. And I am kind of struggling because I didn't even realize we had this function going on this year, because I didn't think there was room in the money, in the budget to actually be able to do it. But here it's more, it seems to be more to handle non-emergency, routine types of calls, kind of like, regular coverage. So that doesn't, it hits me a little bit different than the public safety aspect of
Oh,
it.
sir, I can understand that.
And so that's kind of where, if you really pushed me, I would defer. But I just, the questions and the answers, the number of calls didn't seem to be that many in terms of the hours that we're gonna have coverage. And for the, routine calls, maybe it is routine for the town hall to be open on Saturdays for walk-ins for regular stuff as well.
I hope not.
But I mean, otherwise, the Saturday and Sunday being open at the police station for the routine calls strikes me as, is that, I still haven't quite got there.
Yeah, and I get that conundrum. I think the chief's position is that it is routine calls for service, and we could even perhaps move that function to the town hall if we had somewhere to put that person. But I think his main concern is, if I don't have a civilian there, I'm gonna have an officer there. And I think that's what happened in town before dispatch, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, anybody?
Mhm.
That there was a police officer in the station. Now, I'm told that there is no one there now, and in the event that there was a call for service that was out of the mundane variety, at any time, that an officer would have to come back in, which I think happens in other communities. The officer gets a call and they return to the station to assist the resident in whatever the issue is. So, I guess I just feel like we're going around on this, and if it's a matter of money, let's just decide how much money you want to give, if any, and
Could I ask the question through the chair, please? We budgeted X amount of dollars for this position last year, but, the position was never created because we didn't outsource to Westcom or any other agency. What was in the budget? Do we remember what we budgeted last year?
The whole dispatch department was like $330,000, and the dispatchers were the
But there was
ones
a
at the
greeter.
windows.
But there was a greeter position budgeted because, if I remember correctly, we were going to use some of those funds to offset the cost of a cruiser at one point.
Okay.
Does anybody remember that conversation?
I remember it, but I can't pull up
Yeah.
a
Not
number.
in this committee, maybe
So,
the council.
No, it was in,
I thought it was
was it
like
here?
135,000 or something like that, but I don't want to
I
shoot from
can't
the
pull
hip.
up.
But that's why we deducted when we were talking this year about the budget. We were talking about where was the money going to be allocated for one of the cruisers, and a portion of it was coming from the truck. I believe was coming from mitigation money,
Right.
and the other cruiser was coming from part of the greeter money, which left a balance, if we remember.
Yeah.
So, and I don't have those specific notes, but I think there was probably,
It almost strikes me as though there should be a different job description for the greeter, for what the chief is looking for. He's looking for somebody who is trained to be, for instance, you mentioned suicide watch or whatever. They're not just doing
answering the door.
answering the phone or greeting or directing people as they come into the station. They're also kind of a backup, so that a police officer can be out on patrol rather than be in the station. So, with that being said, if the person is going to be trained or is already trained, whoever applies for the position, if they're already trained, then what the chief is suggesting seems acceptable. There again, if anybody feels this, yes, Jim?
Well, the way I'm looking at it, maybe, I kind of look at it, we go with this proposal, or I look at the 2 weekend days, and that's $15,000 or 14,600.
Yeah.
If you looked at it, do we really need Saturday and Sunday, one could potentially say 66 minus that 14,580. Or if you wanted to at least allow a Saturday, you know, it would be the 66 minus half of that, or 7280. And, you know, the chief can arrange however best to do that. I suppose one thing we could do is put the requested amount in for now with an asterisk, meaning when we get down to the bottom and see what everything looks like, you know, do we feel like we need to make those adjustments?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Is there any, I'm going out on a limb here a little bit, could we consider using some of mitigation money because it goes to public safety?
Yeah, but you have to ask the state. Remember, we were advised last year that you have to submit what purposes you want to use the money for. It has to be approved at the state level before we can use it.
Scratch that then.
Remember
Yeah.
the council had to move it back because it was recently?
Yeah,
Yeah,
was
you're right.
the mitigation money had to
Yeah.
be,
Because that's why you had to take from stabilization to
Right,
Right.
right.
balance.
Okay.
Yeah, through the chair, I tend to agree with Jim. I think at this point, if we put an asterisk, we can look at it in the future. I don't want to be short money on the town's position if the chief feels it's necessary. We may end up with being comfortable with funding it, and we may not, but we don't know that yet. So with an asterisk, with a different job description possibly being written, or state money's coming, we'll be in a better position to make that decision. So to move this along, I think we can probably all agree that let's look to fund it, asterisk it, and then we can deal with it later.
I think that's a good idea.
That's- Otherwise,
that's a
we're
good idea.
gonna be chasing our tail here.
Yeah, and I
And-
mean, I appreciate your remark on reducing it by 7280, but is that really? It's a gesture.
Yeah.
I agree. Do we want to vote on that, or do it just put the asterisk and know that it's for further consideration when the final numbers are in?
I think that would be fine.
Okay.
I think we just have consensus that
Yes. All right.
Chris, if I may, one of the handouts I gave you this morning, that $66,000 increases the tax rate by 4 cents.
4 cents.
Oh,
Thank
That's a lot. More than I thought.
4 cents per thousand.
4 cents.
Doesn't take much to move that tax rate up, does it?
You know, it takes $500,000 to move it down 25 cents.
Okay.
So just for the record again, the actual number 66,000.
128.
66,128 was on that scenario
Okay.
4. I'm looking at here. So the actual budget will be, Mary, you've got 2 different numbers here on this sheet.
Right.
A, B, and 8C.
Yes.
For the police department. So their actual is going to be that $3,018,975.79. That's what we had at the last iteration.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, it'll be the column to the right of that, because the $3,018,000 was the submission on June 1st, which included the greeters at 125 and subtracted Mr. Kavanaugh's position. Let me call Olga, because those are her notes, please. So I think the net increase he's looking for is the 124,896 for a total of 2,960,103.
Oh, that's,
But
That's-
I thought that 66 was the net of the retirement of the officer, paired with the addition for readers.
You could be right.
Yeah.
I think you are right, but let me just call
I
her.
think I
because-
recall that kind of.
Yeah.
Welcome to the East Long Meadow Public.
Oh, thank you.
I'll just say as an aside, I almost feel more distant seeing you guys in person than I did on Zoom.
Yeah. Yeah, because we're right there on the
Yeah.
screen. That was his original.
We're sorry.
What's the town's phone number?
5400.
No, I'm kidding.
Oh.
Hello.
You have reached the town of East Long Meadow.
Thank you.
If you know the
So Kavanaugh, I thought last week when we spoke to the chief, he said Kavanaugh's retirement had already been accounted for in his budget.
It has been, but he's working 1 week into fiscal 21, so.
Right.
Hello, Olga. You have a second?
Yeah.
Okay, you're on speakerphone with the committee, so speak up.
Okay.
On your police notes, you know how we have the 3 columns, the 12/31/19, the 6/1/20, and the 6/12/20?
Yes.
That number from 6/12/20, can you, that was Jeff's budget from June 1st, minus what?
That one includes the number that sheet that he sent. Remember that sheet?
Yes? The,
That one. That adjustment, which is the minus 125 plus whatever that was, 60 something.
the minus 125 for the greeters plus the 66 off his scenario number 4.
Yes.
So the net in, I'm sorry?
That should be that number.
Okay, that's what I thought. Hang on one sec. So the 124,896 is the net increase he's looking for, and the total budget is the 2,960,103.79. Correct, Amundo? That was for you.
I'm trying to open the spreadsheet right now. Something else.
How unusual. The columns where you made those notes just don't have headings, at least on.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's correct.
612 is the 3,018,975.79 minus 125 plus the 66, 128, which is that one sheet that he sent on 612.
Good, got it. Okay. So the final budget request is the 2,960,103.
Oh, that's better.
Yes, and that's what it's showing there right now.
Yes, okay. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yep,
Right.
all right, see you later.
Uh,
Bye. Did you
It's
have a
just-
question?
Yeah, well, I wasn't quite sure I followed completely. The first budget we looked at for the police did not have the 125,000. The second budget we looked at had the 125,000.
Which is the page you gave us
Which is this one
today.
here with the 2,913. So, and it also has the reduction of
For
the
the-
not filling the
Yes.
police officer. So so that reduction is already in there and it's still that amount. So would this then be reduced by the 125, down to 66,000 for another cut? Since
It
we're,
effectively is the 66,000 because it added the 125 and subtracted the 63 or whatever it was that was attributable to Officer Kavanaugh's position.
right, but now instead of the 125, it's going to be 66.
No.
The coverage was needed.
Yeah, I know,
the
you're
coverage
having the
needed
same
was
problem that I had all
125.
week. Olga explained this to me about 72 times.
Sorry, I wasn't quick enough.
No, I had exactly the same problem.
I just did the math and it came out to the third column. So the center column, the 3,018,975 less the $125,000 plus the $63,838 comes up to the new far to the right column total budget.
What page are you looking at, Diane? A, B, and C?
I am B and C, yes, and I'm also looking at my notes from scenario 4 when we discussed it last week. And taking the B and C center column 6-1 budget at the
What was the
3,018,000, and then we subtract. Now I just had it backwards now.
No, you add the
Add
125.
125 and then subtract, and I believe it was 63,838, which was written on my notes,
Jim wasn't following.
which I believe was the excess for the retirement.
Okay, yeah.
And it comes up to the exact amount.
The 2,960,000.
2960,
Yes,
Okay,
with a total increase really of 124,896.
correct.
yeah, but that's
Okay.
that isn't all the front desk attendant. It's gotta be, some of it's gotta be in other pockets.
I have to go
Because-
back, Chris,
Yeah,
if you want to speak up very loud. Anybody's got questions. This is a horrible way to do business, isn't it? But you can.
Well, no, my only question was, so, and maybe Diane's been answering it,
yeah.
the first budget we looked at did not have the greeter
Correct.
budget in it, but it did have not replacing Officer Kavanaugh, is that correct?
It,
Yes, that's my understanding. It didn't have the reader, but Officer Cavanaugh's position was in there.
It was in there,
yeah, okay.
because he
So
just,
that takes care of
All
that.
right, all right, so that, then, the budget that we got handed out today,
that's a 6-1.
that was the 6-1 budget.
Yeah.
Okay, so the 125, we would actually just add the 66,218 to that budget?
No, you'd add
Because the
63.
greeter budget wasn't in there, and I had 6-1.
Which one are we looking at? The one for June 1st or June 12th?
June 1st.
I'm looking at June 1st. The,
Okay. The June 1st includes the greeters in there, the 125,000.
the June 1st included the greeters.
Yeah,
Yeah, and that's why it's 3 million.
Oh, okay. So then, all we need to do is subtract 125 and add 66,280?
That's what we, that's what we do.
128 is what's in there on that June 12th one.
Okay.
I'll never get
That's
this
the
right
125
in the minutes.
and add the 66,128, and that comes up to the 2,960,103.
How did it?
I think the minutes will have to say.
Oh, how did it come out to 63? I said, weren't we adding 66,000?
Yeah, yeah,
June?
66,128.
66,
I think
128.
it's just the number.
Yeah, that was in that sheet. I don't know if you got it with you.
It's burned into my memory. I don't have it in hard copy.
Okay. Yeah, that's the one, that's
Oh.
the number we took at that sheet.
Okay. All right, I'll let you go, and hopefully I won't have to call you again, but I may. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, bye.
I think I'm gonna make the minutes just say there was a consensus to agree to what Olga said.
yeah.
I like that, what Olga said.
Well, yeah, the budget essentially, what we were given, that 3,018,975 or 76, if you want to round it, essentially still contained a retiring officer's salary. So with that adjustment, plus the
No.
adjustment,
I thought it did not. I thought that,
That
I
only
thought
had
I
the readers in
understood
it.
Olga to say that it did not include, it included the assumption that the officer would not be replaced. It's
Yes.
already within the 3,018,000.
oh,
Yes. So is the final, by taking the action of using the greeter model that the chief is asking for.
Yeah.
And netting out Officer Kavanaugh's salary. Is the final budget request from the police to the 612 amount,
Yes.
Yes.
the 2,960,000 with an overall increase of 124,896?
Correct.
Correct.
All right, now I understand. Close
All
enough for the
clear.
minutes.
Okay.
And there's a consensus that we go with that. Is that what
That's
you
what
want
I
the minutes to say?
understand.
Yeah.
Do we all go along with that latest submittal on the police department budget? At $2,960,103.79. Roughly, and it's the increase of $124,896.36 for fiscal '21. It seems, with the adjustments made, it seems reasonable. Should we vote on that? Do we want to accept it instead of putting an asterisk on it for further discussion?
Well, would we have to put an asterisk on that because we already have an asterisk on the greeter number? So we probably should have an asterisk on that as well, because that will change.
Let's use that as our working figure though.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, that's the working number. So we have satisfied that discussion on the reader position. Yes. All right, next on the agenda, we received this morning upon our arrival here, a new capital projects category budget, or recommendations, I should say. If the members of the committee, I think it's Jim Broderick and Mike Kane and Tom O'Connor, you can explain it to us. From what I understand on this new sheet, going down to the column after the electrical switchgear replacement for the public schools, we have a running total of $1,015,092. Is that correct?
Yes. That was the number that we finalized
Okay,
as recommendation.
all right.
Chris, where are you reading that?
On the front page,
Mm-hmm.
on the last column, after that first spacing, you'll see 895,977. From what I understand, the next figure in that column, $1,015,092, is the actual capital recommendation.
For that, for everything above that line.
Yes. So everything else is on hold except for, now. In the amount column, is it just shortened for the feasibility study for the MSBA project?
So the numbers for the two items that we anticipated bounding, instead of the full cost, the number in here is our estimated first year bonding cost,
P9
that
and 2
service.
for the school and for the,
Yeah, for the
Steam pipe.
steam pipes. So where you see the feasibility study,
30 years?
Well, it's only 5, but the steam pipe is 30.
Yeah.
and I think what we did with the feasibility study for this particular year, Chris, is we anticipated that nothing would happen until February 1st. So this represented like 5 months of annual debt service for FY21.
I checked with Dawn as far as bonding costs, which probably has to do with number 6 here. But she told me that the last time they went out to bond, the bonding cost was over $52,000.
That's correct.
Yeah.
I heard the same number. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm thinking, I know that for the high school project, it would right now they can only bond for 5 years. Unless it, the project passes. I guess the question to you members of the town council, are you expecting to go with a debt exclusion vote for that kind of money, or,
I don't think we've even broached that topic yet,
okay?
have we?
No.
Of how we're going to achieve it, right?
Okay. So is this number, the 121,667, is that in consultation with Don, the treasurer?
John supplied us estimated PI, so it is assuming that we start paying principal right at the beginning too, as opposed to, going a year for a short-term interest.
Yeah.
But she supplied us the projected annual principal and interest.
Yeah,
And what we did for this first year was cut that down with the understanding that we probably wouldn't even get to it till February 1st because the schools had gotten permission to go out to that date.
yeah,
And so we assume worst case, we do 5 months of the debt service.
okay, February through June.
But we did not add in any load for, fixed costs to do a bonding.
Yeah,
Sometimes that's a matter of how much you bundle or whatever.
right,
I wouldn't think these amounts would be the kind that you try to go for an override, a debt exclusion for, but that's
Okay.
just my own thinking.
does this new iteration here, Mary, contain the new capital number, or you just got it
No.
this morning?
Just got it this morning. Well, I knew it from our meeting, but
Yeah,
it's not included to answer your question.
okay. I wanted to, on page 2 of this, I have a question on the Stormwater Enterprise Fund. Does that mean that the street sweeper is approved?
Yes, the committees, well, unless somebody from the committee wants to answer that. Go ahead, Jim, you were
You're on
doing a
the
great
committee,
job.
Yeah, so that does mean that we recommended approval of the sweeper.
Is there certified funds, certified by the Bureau of Accounts, to be used by the Stormwater Enterprise Fund?
I
At
think
this
the
point in
assumption
time?
is that it's gonna be borrowed.
It's gonna be borrowed. Okay,
And we didn't do the exercise of the debt service.
All right.
It is kind of inconsistent that we didn't, but we hadn't asked for those projections.
Based on prior experience, I think Bruce Fenny represented that the debt service could be managed from the enterprise fund based on what he had bonded for in the past for different
Yeah.
projects, but we didn't get the specifics from Dawn on that,
Yeah.
on those projects.
yeah,
These
And
funds,
Olga's working on the enterprise fund issues today.
my understanding is these funds are not taxation funds.
no, I
These are
realize
funds
that.
from that account, and that he believes that there'll be enough money in there to pay the debt service.
While you're there, Chris, and in the sewer enterprise fund, you'll see a number of them there, and the water enterprise. And the suggestion from Bruce is that you borrow to acquire those items.
Okay, so, it will be the A and B numbers that are in sewer enterprise. Just tell me which ones are being approved, if you would, please. The communication upgrade,
Yes, that's approved. Or recommended.
The numerical numbers that you see, the 1, 2, and 3, and 4 were
priority.
priorities.
Yeah,
So communications, you can see number 1 next to it, so.
so would that be the only one,
No.
or is the truck being purchased, or how are we doing this?
Let me just
I
find an
misheard you.
email from Ryan here, 'cause he
what
sent
was-
one today on that as well.
In regards to the sewer enterprise funds, those are listed in priorities, 1, 2, 3, 4, just happen to line up that way, right, Jim?
Yes, and I don't want to speak for the committee, but my interpretation of how we did this for the enterprise funds was, provided there was sufficient debt service capacity within the enterprise funds revenues and expenses that could absorb it and not result in an exorbitant increase in rates, which
Right.
according to Bruce and his projections seemed to be the case. We felt that all of these would be, worthy projects. But is that your recollection?
Yeah. It's contingent on the money being available in that fund to pay for the debt service on the bond. Yeah.
So in essence, $1,030,858 is going to be handled by the sewer enterprise fund
Yes.
in borrowing. And the water enterprise,
Those would be the water meter modules, 25% of the communication upgrades, PLC upgrades, and the dump truck. So 504,908. Again, that is the gross amount. The debt service, we did not, I apologize, we did not think to get the debt service numbers.
okay.
Chris, I have an email from Ryan this morning. He was our chair of that committee, because I asked him about the rating, and I was looking for a report similar to this. But in any case, he wrote, I believe our discussion was around Bruce saying that he worked the new rates assuming all projects were approved, and there wasn't much discussion on limiting approvals. My interpretation is that the committee is comfortable recommending all enterprise fund projects. And that correlates to my recollection of our discussion at the last meeting.
Okay. Well, the majority of the committee has been on the capital committee, so I don't know how we cannot accept what you have come up with if that's your recommendation.
Right, I think we had left the difference between the 895 and the 1,015,000 from the general fund. You know, it's really a question of what the Financial Oversight Committee feels it can absorb. But, you know, if we could go 15,000 over the target, then, you know, that final project in that category would be recommended.
Yeah, I felt that this is our recommendation, but we're only looking at part of the picture. Once we bring the entire budget into sync, that this might need to be revisited, and then we would work in in an order of the numbers that were designed and decide which project comes off the bottom to make the
Correct.
total budget work for the community.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. I'm looking for where it's plugged in here, where we should plug it in rather.
It's
Oh,
down
and
at the bottom. I think it's,
What page is that?
well, actually, it's the last page, Chris.
Okay, capital projects, AG,
Yeah.
okay. We had reduced it by 49 million, but now we're gonna change that a little bit, okay. 592.
And we didn't change that on this summary from the capital report. The dollar figure isn't updated
Yeah.
for capital. The only changes on this one, as you get there, they're shaded to reflect the different line items that we
Yeah.
made adjustments to, when you get there.
Okay. The next item on the agenda, if we're comfortable with the capital projects report as submitted for the time being, pending further knowledge of final figures. The question of the furloughed employees, some are coming back, some are not yet. Mary had given me some information concerning that. Let's see, the library, recreation, town clerk, and council on aging budgets do not include the full salary of currently furloughed employees. However, let's see. The budget may be amended later in the summer to reflect these additional payroll costs in library, council on aging, but include the recreation and clerks positions because they are coming back.
They're all included in the summary that I gave you today at full value. Which is
For all
all
the
the-
remaining furloughed people
Yes, yes.
are included in today's summary for July 1.
Yes, what I was trying to express in that email was at the time of the most recent budget submission from library, for example,
Right.
if you recall, they cut their budget by 10%,
Yeah.
and that was the furlough of 6 people,
Yeah.
essentially. And the library is still closed to the public, and it will not open for the foreseeable the next 2 or 3 months. So the director there doesn't anticipate that she'll need those people back full-time, but, so you can take them out of the budget or we can put them in, but
Best to leave them in, otherwise.
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the date when they return was never determined when they were furloughed because of the uncertainty of everything. Some departments need their people back. Clerk's office, for example, had one employee who was furloughed 1 day a week. But now that the election season is on us and there's this, rush for absentee ballots and a lot of extra work, the clerk asked if she could bring that person back full-time, and I said yes. So, it's $8,000 or something like that, an increase in the clerks. It's $87,000 back in the library budget. And
Yeah.
recreation, the same. They have, their camps are starting Monday. They're thrilled about it, but they've had 2 employees on furlough, and they've been down a position since March that they've not filled. And the director would very much like to fill that position. We can fill it at a considerable savings, at about 80% of what the last occupant of the position was making. But that's in there also, just so you know. And
Okay.
so they're all in there at 100% funding for fiscal '21.
Good.
Rather than having to re-explain it later on in the summer.
Okay.
So basically the bottom line is the only change today, having the number from the police department, now that all the adjustments have been made, that's fine, that's in here. And the only other change would be the $15,892 for the capital that gets added to this. Number 6, I don't, learning now about the way that the capital committee has figured out the debt and the payment possibly for 5 months. I'm sure the bonding cost is not going to be as high as originally anticipated, so I don't think that we need any further discussion on that. Let that sit. Any other old business? I guess under old business, what I'd like to say is next Wednesday, we will meet again, hopefully to finalize this for the time being, so that we can give the council some idea at perhaps their meeting on July 7th.
I misspoke on July 7th. It's the 14th, isn't it?
That's even better.
Yeah.
So if we need to
The
meet
meeting?
before then.
Our July meeting would be I said 7 and 21, but it really is 14 and
Oh.
28. Jeannie reminded me of that this morning. It's the second Tuesday.
Okay, so for right now, we'll plan on finalizing next Wednesday. And then if we do need another meeting before going to the council, we'll wait till after next week's meeting to to decide on a date. Does that sound acceptable to everybody?
We do have to, when you make that presentation, we'll be considering that the public hearing on the 14th, because we have to post for that.
Yeah. Okay.
Does that make sense?
Like we
Does to
did
me.
last year?
Yes.
It
Yeah.
does to me, sure.
As long, yeah.
Yeah, we held
Wait,
that
you-
in a large auditorium.
Right.
Now, we still may have, well, we'll have to do that by Zoom, but nonetheless, we still have to post, publicize, I should say, in the reminder.
Right.
Okay.
And just so you know, Chris, yes, as of yesterday, I was on a call and one of the undersecretaries of Administration and Finance was a participant, and she anticipated that the state is going to operate on a 1/12 budget for the foreseeable future as well. So we're not getting any certainty with respect to the revenue side for local aid. The one thing she did say was that for purposes of the state's 1/12 budget, they're going to use the fiscal 20 figures, which is what we did for July for East Long Meadow, and I suspect we'll be doing the same for August unless we have some certainty in the meanwhile.
Yeah, the only thing I have read is that the state is out about $6 billion in revenue. They do have $3.5 billion in the rainy day fund, but I think they will probably try to push for federal aid before they go into that rainy day fund and justify it. So, we've done the best we could with the information that we have and the cooperation of the departments, and certainly your cooperation, Mary. You've been working, I don't know how hard to get this done.
Well, thank you.
So,
I have a lot of help, a lot
Yeah.
of help.
you need a lot of help.
I need more
This
than I
is
have, but I've had a lot.
most unusual. Okay, any new business? If there's nothing else, I would ask you all to review the numbers. If you have any questions at all for our next meeting next Wednesday, please advise me, if you will, or Mary, and I'll entertain a motion.
Will we be here or back on Zoom?
That's a good question. Will we
Your
be?
pleasure.
This works. This works, don't you think?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if I can, I'd like to make sure we have an executive on there in the event that any discussions come up revolving around personnel issues.
I'm
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
He wants an executive session in case anything comes up about personnel issues. Would that be subject for this committee or something more for the council?
Executive sessions have, there's 9 various
There's 10
criteria
reasons, yeah.
that have to be, one of the 9 have to be applied in order to meet the level of going into executive session. So what you're suggesting, Tom, might be too broad because it doesn't nail down a specific, like to go into renegotiate with police, fire, whatever it might be. Just to make it generically, I'm not sure that it, and I'm saying I'm not sure, we can defer to Jeannie and having her speak with the AG's office, but I think they're going to give us a thumbs down on that. It has to be very specific.
And the
But jump
notice
in, Mary, if-
Well, the notice has to be specific. If
Right.
you're gonna have an executive, you have to alert the public to what you're
Speaking
discussing.
Yeah,
To the-
and quite frankly, this committee is talking finances. So, I don't know.
It has to do with the new position. And,
Oh.
and the concerns that we all have that we shared and the reason for the asterisk.
Yeah,
And I think there may be a need for further discussion as we get more information.
Okay, well, if I may, I would think that would be an open session topic. Only, unless you're talking about the character or reputation of someone, that's the first exclusion. But since there's no one occupying that position, there's no one in particular to talk about in that regard. We're not litigating it, and we're not negotiating it. Those are the 3 that we usually use for executive, but I mean, obviously, if
Well, my concern goes back to the conversation that we had, that you mentioned some weeks ago, with the possibility of some litigation that might occur.
yeah, well, litigation that might occur
Doesn't fit.
is probably not a sufficient
Not
reason.
subject
It
to
has to be,
it has to be standing litigation.
it has to be in litigation
Yeah.
to discuss strategy.
So nothing's changed that we know of.
No, everything's going swimmingly, in fact.
Good.
On all
Swimmingly?
fronts,
Let me
swimmingly.
put that in the minutes. Things are going swimming.
I like that word. Okay, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.